Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. It's good to be here with you. As we will see in a bit, we have our guest today is special for a very special reason, but we'll bring that up in a bit later because our guest today is Dena Crowder. And she is on a mission to revolutionize world's relationship to power. As a speaker, writer, and transformational leader, she helps spiritually connected and highly creative game changers align their skills with their souls, uplift their projects, and answer their higher calling, all with an effort to shift the status quo. Today, Dena and I are going to talk about her truly brilliant observation of the two kinds of power. And I'm not giving away what we're going to talk about in the show, but we'll talk a lot about it in the show. And that is, her distinctions are, there's the power over and the power to. The first, the power over, is about control, while the other, the power to, is about service. Her work truly, folks, is paradigm shifting. When it comes to understanding power, Dena Crowder is the go-to resource. Her 2020 TEDx talk, The Power Is You, check this out, went viral and has been viewed by by almost 1 million people. That's amazing. So with that, let's bring on our guest, Dena Crowder. Welcome back to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thank you. It's always great to be here. It feels like coming home.
Well, it does feel like that's what I want to talk about. It is home. Oh, check this out. I was going through my records, and over the last 5 years, you have been on the show 5 times. Numbers.
Do I get a prize?
You do. Which is way to go. I love you. Is that a prize?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is.
And today is number 6. So you can guess how much, and the audience can guess how much I enjoy chatting with you about a host of subjects, including archetypes, the unconscious, inner power, and then in COVID, we talked about George Floyd and the issues of race, which is particularly important because you as a black woman offer insights so different than those of me as a white male. And I always learn so much about those sorts of issues with you because, Dena, with you I can have a dialogue. I don't have, I'm not shamed, or you understand both sides, and so you are just truly brilliant and so fun and so insightful. You are. I didn't write this here. I wrote it somewhere. You know what you're like? You're like an SNL host. The SNL hosts that always love to brag how many times they've hosted the show. Well, Dena gets to say 6. And the only person that has more than you as sort of a co-host is Terry Hershey, but he's really kind of like a co-host, and so he's been on several times. But as a genuine guest, you are number 6, most popular. How about that?
I love it. 6 is a terrific number, except my number 6.
Great. So before we get into our subject we're going to do power and archetypes, you know what I think might be fun, Dena? If you were to tell us just a bit about your recent pilgrimages in Europe, what did you do and what drove you to do such pilgrimages?
Wow, what a way to start out, Charlie.
A shock.
You're a shock jock. Let's see here. Well, yes. Hello, listeners, and to Charlie's show. It's, as I said, great to be here always. And Charlie's referring to a recent pilgrimage to Italy. And he asked me, how did you decide to go to Italy? And what I told him is I got an inner impulse in meditation. And that is what led me to go, although I didn't know at the time why. And maybe about a month before I was to leave, it became clear that one of the reasons that I was going, you talked a lot about me and power there, Charlie, is to be in the epicenter of a place where many of our current modern Western ideas, especially here in America, about power came from, and that is Imperial Rome. So I went to the heart of that, and approaching the trip as a pilgrimage means that I don't show up like it's a vacation. I show up asking myself, okay, in my itinerary, what are the places I need to go? Maybe I need certain guides to take me, and what are the spiritual meditations or journaling that I need to do to really get the insight that qualify the trip as a pilgrimage. So that was the background, and I truly returned with just amazing mental shifts and realizations around how we came to view that power over that we are facing today in many existential crises, and maybe what needs to happen for us to accelerate the shift towards connected power, shared power, and the power that uplifts and elevates or evolves humanity.
You're the only one I have read or heard that talks about that kind of power, and it is just, it's so obvious. That's what I think genius is stating the obvious when everybody else misses it. It's not like you go, oh, that's interesting. You go, oh my goodness, that is true. How come I've never thought of that? And Rome, you're right. That was the epicenter of power. And what so many people don't know, because we've watched too many movies of famous actors being Roman leaders, but the Roman world was a terrible world. It was, there was poverty, there was people dying of malnutrition and dirty streets and no sewage and no water. And yet the Romans were able to maintain power for so long. How long, Dena? 1,000 years?
Well, the imperial period was, you had a couple of centuries there. And then the fall of Rome, people argue about the exact date, but definitely when we're getting up to around 400 AD, it's all been swept away, and we have the barbarians coming in, and then no more of our idea of what Rome is or was. But something you said is really interesting. We've watched a lot of movies. They're very glamorous.
Right.
They're very glamorous, and we all have this fantasy of, great Rome. But you know what? 99% of the population was not in power, not in control, and had no rights.
And truly 99. You are not exaggerating when you say 99.
Women didn't have freedoms and rights in general, and children didn't have rights. But also, there was slavery as well. It was a different form of slavery than American chattel slavery, but there was slavery. And in fact, the entire Roman system of empire and how that empire succeeded was based on exploitation. And part of that was that they had to keep colonizing new areas and then either subjugating or enslaving, or a little bit of both, those populations, taking the best and the brightest and bringing them back and into Imperial Rome, but taking the resources. I mean, one of the things that I learned that I did not know before, I had visited the Colosseum previously, but this time I went with a professor of history who took me through the entire Colosseum. Fascinating. I learned that it is highly likely that the Colosseum was built by Jewish slaves, Never knew that. And that it was financed by money that was received when the Romans went and totally destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem, looted it, took the money. I mean, this is like really some
like a lot of there's a lot of gold and silver and bronze in the temple. Yeah.
They looted Jerusalem, they looted the temple, they destroyed it, and then they took slaves. So they financed the building with the money they stole, and then the people they used as the labor. Kind of like a double whammy.
Yeah. And that's what I really want to get into as we talk, and that is, and I'll just barely allude to it, but it is the notion, our common notion of power as control. And your definition expands upon that so helpfully, and I want to get into it. So here's what I'm thinking, Dena. In our subject of archetypes and power, I'm wondering, where do we begin? And with archetypes of power, and I think I'd like to start with power. Is that okay with you?
That is fine with me.
Yeah. Now, I was thinking and I wrote that power is such a loaded word. Now, although the word power in our culture today may be fraught with so many socially negative perceptions, nevertheless, in many ways, it remains one of our highest goals. As a culture, even people that don't like power, instead of trying to adjust power, want to become the powerful. They want to become the ones in control. And so what I would love for you to do is talk to me about the nature of power. Why do we hunger, not for your power to, but power over? Why do we hunger so much for power over?
I'm going to give you two reasons, and one has to do with, because it's kind of like what we've been talking about with where our models come from. If we grow up in a world where power over, power as dominance, power as control, power as force, power as the ability to enact violence, where that is the standard, then it's not safe for us unless we have that kind of power.
It's not safe for the powerful.
It's not safe for the powerless.
Oh, it's not safe. It's really not safe for both, but the ones who suffer the most are the powerless.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's why if you feel powerless in a world where power is defined by dominance, force, violence, etc., then you will hunger to be the one who holds the reins of that kind of power.
Isn't power in some ways to those seeking power, isn't there, there's this borderline evil desire to control and to be powerful, but isn't perhaps the most common need for, I'm not talking about heads of state, but just us as individuals, isn't power closely related with safety?
Yes, yeah. That's so. If I'm somebody who, this story, Charlie, we see it all the time, where somebody grew up. I'll give you one real life example without naming any names. There's a certain Supreme Court justice right now on the bench who grew up being extremely poor and bullied. He talks about it. He was shamed, bullied, he was extremely poor, and he determined at a certain point, I don't want to feel this way anymore. I don't want to be the one getting bullied. So what happens if we're talking in terms of archetypes and how the flow of power works in the psyche is a person can make a decision, you know what, I want to be the one doing the bullying.
Right.
That feels safer. That feels less painful. And then that person made the decision. Okay, I'll either be the bullied or the bully. I'll either be the dominated one or the dominator. We have that in our culture. But there was another reason you asked why people seek it, and I want to give you a spiritual reason that has to do with the way the human psyche works. We all have an ego. And by ego, I'm not just talking about someone who has a chip on their shoulder and they're arrogant. We all have an identity structure. We all have a personality. We have an ego.
Right.
And right? We just all do. It's part of the mechanism. And the mechanism of the ego, as it's developed along with human beings for the last how many thousands of years, is that the ego seeks to distinguish itself. It seeks to distinguish itself, to separate itself, and in many cases to prove that it is superior. There's an element of the kind of power that we see in the world that relates to and appeals to that mechanism in the ego.
That's brilliant, Dena, and my sort of penchant for following the late medieval mystics' ego and is a very strong, dominant concept. But in the mystical tradition, the ego is actually there are two egos. There's the true self and the small self. And the true self, that ego is important. We need to know, we need to be confident, we need to know we're capable, we need to know we're accepted. There's just a number of things that fit around that ego that are very healthy. But what you've been defining is the small ego, the selfish ego, the one that is insecure and needs the affirmation of other people, and it needs to be controlling of other people because it replaces our low self-esteem and our low regard for ourselves.
That's a good way of putting it.
Is it? Oh, thank you.
Good way of putting it, yeah.
And that's why, the mystics will write, one of the virtues is powerlessness, is that, we have simplicity, solitude, powerlessness. But when they use that word, I agree in powerlessness, but they're talking about control. Powerlessness of control. They are not talking about the Dena Crowder alternative to power over and power to control others and to the main person in charge and the one who's making the decision to off with their head or whatever. But I would love for you to delve into your brilliant alternative of Power 2, because when I take Power 2, I no longer want to be powerless. I want to be powerful, and that's very different. You need to explain that to us, because that's a Dena Crowder specialty.
Okay, well, wonderful. One word about that identity that you were speaking about with the small self that I want to offer to your audience, and it's that size. He's or she is a master.
Can you repeat that? We kind of had a little blurb on the thing. Can you repeat that? A little
Absolutely.
Buzz.
Identity is like a master of disguise.
Okay,
it's a master costumer who places these costumes and masks and wigs onto your essential self, which you were referring to when you spoke about the mystics and the true self. We have this essential self, and the identity comes along, which is a mechanism of the ego, and it allows you to play all these different roles. But the problem with that, there's not a problem with that. The problem is when we get confused and we're so attached to a role, we think it's who we are. We think it's all we are. We think that it is what defines our value. Imagine if you're an actor and you play a role, and then the curtain goes down or the movie's over, and you refuse to give up the costume and the role. We think you're a little nutty. We send you in for some help. But that's what we do in our lives. We get so identified with that role because the ego loves these things. It loves permanence, solidity, continuation, and invulnerability. And we as humans are not permanent. We are not solid. We are not continuous. And we are not invulnerable. And that, my dear friend Charlie, makes us terrified. So we say, oh my God, I gotta stop this feeling of being impermanent and invulnerable. How do I do that? I create these identities and I lob onto them, and I tell myself this is strong, or this makes me good, or this makes me valuable. So I just wanted to offer that to your audience because we see that right now all the time in our personal lives, but also in our political situations. Some people are so, quote, identified with a label that they can't find their essential self if it bit them, because they've invested their entire value in this label. And let me tell you, I don't care what the label is, even if it's a, quote, good label, it's not correct, because your essential self is a divine self, and you're much greater than any rigid category.
As you were talking, you reminded me of a Japanese concept, when you're talking about being permanent and, and things being perfect and all. And are you familiar with the Japanese thoughts on wabi-sabi?
Just a tiny bit. You can...
Oh, it's brilliant. And here's just, I just pulled it up online, and here's a quick definition, but there are 3 terms that really fit it. Wabi-sabi is Japanese view or thought on finding beauty in every aspect of imperfection in nature. Of imperfection. It is about the aesthetic of things in existence that are, check this out, imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. And that is what is valued by the followers of wabi-sabi. I love that life is imperfect, it is impermanent, and it is incomplete. And when we accept that leaves an openness, a receptivity to beauty and joy, and seeing beauty and joy in the imperfect, in the incomplete, and in the impermanent, knowing that there is something beautiful about the transience, yet stability that is found in this. Does that strike you in any way?
Yes. It's a very compatible concept with what we're speaking about. Really being able to be present to life and experience life, receive it and give from that deepest part of you to the deepest part of life. And that leads us to power. That leads us to power. Because I tell people personal power, you can gauge it by asking the following. Am I connected? Am I at cause? Am I at choice? Am I able to direct my energy and influence outcomes? Because when you are in the power, in the way that I speak about it, you have a sense of being connected to the essential self you and I are just referring to. You also have a sense of being connected to something larger than yourself.
Right.
So for some people that sounds like higher power or God or the universe or
source or anything that's larger than we are.
Anything larger than we are that is evolving us in a loving, wise, and compassionate manner. And then being at cause. Well, that's the opposite of being at effect, where you're just slapped upside the head like a bumper car, and you don't have the next one, which is the ability to, well, you don't have agency, and then the next one, which is you don't have the ability to choose. You don't have the ability to direct your resources and to influence outcomes. When you have those things on and poppin', as the young kids would say, then you truly feel the flow of your power.
And oh, go ahead.
And it doesn't matter whether you are sweeping streets in India or cleaning toilets in Manhattan or in the CEO chair, because, Charlie, as you know, I work with people who are founders and CEOs.
Yeah, you work with players.
They have the same issues and have to confront them, although the issues may come in different packages. We all have to confront these issues of power.
You know, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to talk about archetypes and power. But I do want to stress this for our listeners to ponder over the break, and that is, I really want to emphasize this power over versus the power to, and that the power over obviously is control, but the power to is the power to influence, is to empower others. It's a power to do good. It's a power to be helpful and useful and generous and kind, and so moved by power to. So power to just is, one of the things that I cling to so often, and I want to thank you for that. And that's what we're going to get into after the break. Okay.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, let's break. Hi there, you're listening to Charlie Hedges in the Next Chapter with Charlie, and we are on a very powerful show today, and we are talking about power with my dear friend and one of the experts, go-to people on the nature of power, Dena Crowder, and we have been talking about what power is all about, difference between power to control and the difference and its opposite, which is the power to influence, inspire, empower other people to do. And one of Dena's other go-to areas that is related to power, and that is the concept of archetypes. Dena and I have done a couple of podcasts on archetypes, and I'm big on archetypes. And we'll go over mine, and we'll talk about the influence of archetypes and how they relate to power. So, Dena, you told me, as we're talking about archetypes, how do you recognize an archetype to begin with?
Well, everyone recognizes archetypes. Everyone speaks the language of archetypes. This I promise you. And I will give you a wonderful example. My little niece, when she's 5 years old now, but when she was 4, we were watching something and she said, "Oh, look, Auntie, there's a queen." And then we were reading something in one of her books and she said, "Oh, he's the villain. Let's get him." The language of archetypes, already so young. And let me tell you,
and we've never related it to that. I mean, how many people relate that to an archetype? They just say that's sort of a character in a story or in a book. But this is a fundamental, universal, typically universal archetype.
That's correct. It's a universal pattern that has been seen over centuries from across all cultures. And what I mean by that is I'm not lumping every culture together, but across many cultures, I should say. We were talking about Rome. If we went back to ancient Rome and we saw a little 5-year-old child, they would be able to identify some of these same archetypes that we have today. If we went back to ancient Greece, if we went to Africa, they might use slightly different terms, but that understanding of queen or king or chief or teacher or hero, rebel, they defy the Thurley bond of time and place. They are patterns of behavior that we look at and we have attached a name to, and so we call that an archetype. And archetypes manage the flow of power in our psyche because we understand where power should or shouldn't go, and by that I mean our energy and resources based on our relationship to certain archetypes. So I talked about the queen and the king, which many people might say, oh, that's just a character. No, they're archetypes because they demonstrate some of these universal patterns.
Yeah, matriarchal family is a queen.
Yes. But then we also have families of archetypes. We have, for example, an action family. And an action family, there would be a hero would be part of that, or the rebel would be part of that. Mm-hmm. We have a healing family, and the mystics might be part of the healing family, or the wise woman. We have a survival family, and guess what? All of us in human bodies have in common the survival family. Because all of us in our journey to maturation, we are tasked with learning how to manage our power, learning how to manage our energy, learning how to do the things we talked about before the break, how to make choices, how to make good choices, how to feel at cause, how to use our agency, how to influence positive outcomes. We are all tasked with that. And our journey to that is a journey through survival, or, in my terminology, feeling powerless. And those archetypes, Charlie, are child, saboteur, prostitute, and victim.
Those are the, not disabling, but the survival. Tell me, just so we're not hung up on sexuality and position, what is the archetype of a prostitute?
That one is about compromising your value or selling out.
Oh.
I just spoke about that archetype to a client this morning, and I said to her, "You're in a tussle with your survival archetype, prostitute, because you don't want this job. This particular job that you're thinking." That you're considering, you've just told me it drains you. It gives you headaches. You are overeating. It causes you to be in despair and almost an existential crisis.
Right.
You already know the answer to your decision is already made for you. However, that archetype, that survival archetype, the prostitute, is saying, well, wait a minute. No. You can compromise your values. Oh, you can compromise yourself. I mean, you could just get the money. It's not that bad. You can do it. Sell out. So she's not going to do it. But that's an example. It has nothing to do with sexuality, although it could for some people relate. But
sure.
It's really about compromising your integrity, compromising your value, devaluing yourself, or feeling that that's what you have to do in order to survive.
I want to continue with that thought, but I'm going to add, sort of a mini MINI statement first, and that is, the sort of, at least in the Western world, the two people that sort of model or have created and written about archetypes are Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell in his hero mythologies. And the beautiful thing is that when we think about these brilliant individuals, they did not invent archetypes, they observed them. It's like the hero and the queen and the king and the survival archetypes. It's not something they created, it's something they observed. This is the way life works. And you know what I have observed, now back to your point, you did a whole power map of archetypes for me some years ago when, by the way, folks, Dena was my life coach for a number of years and just did we had a remarkable relationship, and she was so helpful. And so she explored my archetypes, and she did a archetypal map or a power map, or I can't recall exactly what it was called, Dena. But I realized every one of my archetypes are in some form or fashion a power archetype, because they are accessing my strengths, what I am good at, what I can, I don't know if I want to use the word succeed, but what I can live at. And each one of those gives me, as I'm looking at these, there's not one, or maybe there's one that could be interpreted power over, but they're all power too. And at the risk of being too boring, I'm going to list my 10, just so readers or listeners can get an idea of what the archetypes can lead to. Does that make sense to you to try this?
Yeah.
Okay, so these are not in order of importance. They're just the order that I had in Evernote, and so this is the way they came out. Explorer, the explorer/adventurer, leader, wise counselor, romantic, creator, author, thinker, realist, mystic. Now that sounds like a lot, and somebody could say, it's just too many. But every one of them are acutely defined. They acutely define who I am. And then I have my 10th and maybe my favorite archetype of all, the holy outcast. And that just, I never fit in. I fit largely in Christianity, but it is, not hook, line, and sinker. I don't buy the whole thing. I buy the essence of it, the critical essence of it, but there are parts of it that I am an outcast because I'm thinking differently, although I'm no longer an outcast since so many people are saying religion, and especially church and Christianity and other religions, just are not working because it's has it not turned into a power over construct instead of a power to?
Well, there's no better example of that than, again, back in Rome, seeing how the ancient church came into being, the Catholic Church, after
Constantinople.
Constantine, yes.
Or Constantine, yes, I'm sorry.
No, that's what Constantinople is named after him.
Yeah, I know.
That Christianity was no longer going to be outlawed, and then eventually it became a state religion.
Right.
And it wasn't about spirituality or saving souls. It was about maintaining worldly power. And through many centuries, in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, you still see Catholicism, and I'm not picking on Catholicism, I happen to be Catholic, but you still see how the Catholicism was being structured no differently than any other empire.
Right.
That's why it was called the Holy Roman Empire, and they had an army. They weren't just ministering to people's souls. So yes, the power over, and that concept of what power is, that it's about worldly possessions, it's about force, it's about violence, it's about domination, it's about getting others to being able to subjugate others in some way, that idea is very old. And that's why we're grappling so much with it right now. And people are not able to recognize. That's why I work with power and work with archetypes, because once you can recognize what's happening, there's a possibility of making a change. Once you see that, oh, this is about my own power and me coming into power, me moving beyond living in reaction to survival and living from those archetypes into my own power, and then being able to connect to and contribute to others. That's really important. You know, there's a victim conversation, Charlie, right now, and you will hear from people that have various viewpoints, oh, the other side, they're victims. No, the other side, they're victims. It's everywhere. Then the victim conversation is really about, I am being done wrong. I am being done wrong, and my ability, my agency is being taken. And that needs to change. We have to shift from a victim conversation and I am owed and I've been done wrong and I'm powerless to, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do? What am I here to do to help things evolve?
That's great insight. You know what occurred to me is that not the impetus for the American Revolution against England? Is that America felt victimized and felt under the control of the British and wanted to be in control of themselves and, to have their way rather than being controlled by a foreign country? Wasn't our country is almost essentially founded on that principle?
Yeah, they did something with the energy. They channeled it through into the revolutionary archetype, and then after that, tried to create something different.
You were talking about, as we're beginning to wind down here a bit. You were talking about what were you talking about? Oh, I want to capture this correctly. That Charlie, think now that the churches have been since Constantine. It's more into power and control and sort of executive. I have a personal experience. Paul loves stories. 20 years ago, in the Episcopal Church, and I'd been a member of this Episcopal Church for just a handful of years, half dozen years, and I was selected to be a member. Our rector, which is our senior minister in an Episcopal church, resigned, and we had to have a search committee to find a new rector. And I was, elected to be on the search committee. And my job as a writer, researcher, and doing what I do was to write a profile of our church, of St. Margaret's, and what we're all about, what we do. This was to send to potential candidates for the rector position. But when I defined the role, I was a handful of years out of ministry, back into business, back into working with CEOs, and I made the mistake of framing the role of the rector as a CEO, not as a pastor. And that was brought up to me by a couple of parishioners that just said, I'm Charlie, they're very kind, you've done a nice job here, blah, blah, blah. But this role does not sound like the pastor we need, but a CEO to build an empire. And I had to rewrite that. And that was, that was my influence of power in the world and thinking, and I came from a mega church that had 15,000 people. And so, that was the role of the senior minister, was to be more CEO than pastor. And I think that that's true in many churches of all denominations today, is that we are empire building and not soul transformation.
Well, we don't have to look far to prove and confirm your point, because we had the Catholic Church priest abuse scandal, which they covered up because they didn't want the reputational damage. Their care was not for their parishioners, for their souls, or even their mental health or physical health. It was for this other idea of making sure their power stayed consolidated. More recently, there was a Baptist church.
Oh, Southern Baptist.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. A Southern Baptist church scandal. And they were covering up extreme cases of abuse. In many cases, rape, harassment, sleeping with underage young ladies. And they covered that up for the same reason, because they did not want to have anything happen with the consolidation of what they perceive power to be. So those are just two examples, and we could be here for another hour giving examples of organizations that are either set up to help people spiritually at the soul level, mentally, or physically, that end up getting caught and ensnared in the fangs of this confusion about power.
I'm so with you. Okay, I have 1.5 questions left, and a half question is off topic. This is on topic, and you stayed when we chatted earlier, and you stated that it is important to integrate and you use the term, I like this term, flow of power into your personal management system. And you said an archetype is a vehicle to use flow of power. Will you talk to me about what you mean about flow of power?
Yes, and I'm going to even use you as an example, Charlie.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. You read your power map of archetypes that we did together a few years ago to your audience recently, like during this episode. And if we pick any one of them, so go ahead, just pick one right now.
Okay, the first one I see, and I have to...
Religious outcast.
No, Paul wanted me to do Holy Outcast. Yeah, let's do Holy Outcast. What the heck? It's my favorite.
Okay, let's do Holy Outcast. One of the things that we did together, Charlie, is when we looked at your power map and situations that were coming up in your life, we would say, which archetype is this the job for? And let's assume that something's happening in your life. Maybe even you're going to be, let's say, hosting a podcast or giving a talk. And we say, who's this a job for? This is a job for the Holy Outcast to help you with the writing and in the delivery. And then what we would do is go into a visualization where you get to connect with the Holy Outcast. Because remember, it's a pattern of being and behavior. And when you connect with that Holy Outcast, you begin to be in an exchange where you start to wake up all of those patterns that align with the Holy Outcast. You start to wake them up. And then, before we know it, the flow of power, and let me break that down, the flow of ideas, the flow of creative energy, the flow of the flow of your emotional feeling, all of that starts moving in alignment with the Holy Outcast. And as you quoted or mentioned Joseph Campbell before, he has a phrase where he talks about the hero's journey, and he says, where we had thought to be alone, we will in fact be with all the world. So when you get in touch with, let's say, your holy outcast, and it starts moving and flowing in you, that's how you manage, that's one way that you manage the flow of power. And then you show up as a version of the holy outcast, your own unique version, but nonetheless, you're at one with all the holy outcasts from Jesus the Christ on down that have ever existed in all of time.
It is so incredible talking to you, Dena. You just it's obviously you're researched in this, you're knowledgeable in this, you've written on this. I think, is your new book going to be about this?
My book is called Spellbreaker, and it is about a new hero, or since I'm a lady, heroine's journey for our times, because we are all on a hero's journey, every one of us. That's why
absolutely.
We're here right now. Nobody's here to be a couch potato, to sit on the sidelines, to just have a house in the suburbs. We are all being called to get in power and answer the call of our own heroes or hero's journey. No matter what our position is, how, quote, high or low, we're here for a reason.
I love that. Okay, so here's my question that has little to do with power and archetype. I can't believe I'm closing with something. It's Paul's going to be looking at me like, "What are you doing? You don't do this on a show." But you gave a quote when we were talking that was so powerful, and I would just like a couple of sentences, Dena, because it's a powerful quote, and it does have to do with power and archetype. It has to do with our life in general, and how do we plan our lives? And we're so concerned about daily goals, weekly, goals and objectives. The two measurement words of America that are so important. And you said this quote that I just love. Life brings you your curriculum to you every day. Your curriculum comes from life. Your curriculum is not necessarily as predetermined as you think it is. It is fluid, and it fits with your ideas of flow. Just, talk a minute on that.
Look at what's incoming. Look at what shows up at your door. It may not be the Tiffany package you were hoping for, but whatever is showing up is your curriculum from, let's say, your higher self, or from source, from life itself. It is delivering to you every day. Sometimes it's not so pretty, sometimes it's beautiful. But whatever it is, life is bringing you the curriculum, and it is showing us what we need to pay attention to, where we are being asked to grow, where we're being asked to heal, and to act with love and courage. Life brings us that curriculum every day.
And don't we too often look at that curriculum as a distraction rather than a direction?
Of course. We think, oh, no, can you get away? Because I'm busy doing things.
I got important things to do.
I have important things to do. And then it knocks again. And we'll go away, I'm busy. This is what happened to me. And by the way, Charlie, you've just identified what happens in the classic hero journey and arc is we refuse the call. The call is knocking, and in everybody from Star Wars to Moana, we say, I'm doing this other thing, or I can't go on a damn fool mission with you, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I can't. But the truth is, that distraction is your direction, and it's a divine direction. It's trying to call you and get your attention.
And truly, this will be closing. Our emphasis on archetypes and power really are opportunities of life's curriculum. Life's curriculum is giving us those opportunities, giving us ways to tap into our created self-identity and use that for service in a community not to control and get our way.
Well said. You're hired.
Dena Crowder, you are, you just really are too cool. And this is, where I had written that of the repeated guest hosts on SNL, you are the one that gets to come up. I've hosted this show 6 times. Terry Hershey doesn't count. He's just a friend.
I've hosted this show 6 times, and woo!
It's been a delight every time. Thank you so much for being my guest today for the 6th time. And let's make sure that you send to me your website and your TED Talk with that we can get over 1 million views.
Yes, we're doing it.
That's I'm so proud of you. That is, not so much proud, but just happy that you're happy that you get to accomplish your goals, and you're doing such a fine job at it.
Oh, thank you so much, Charlie. Okay, well, I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Okay, and I want to thank all our listeners for tuning into the next chapter with Charlie. And this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.